The 20th woman arrived on a Tuesday morning, her silk dress already dusted with Montana snow. Like the 19 before her, she would leave by nightfall, her father's political ambitions crushed by two words: ride out. Caleb Hawthorne stood at his ranch house window, watching another expensive carriage retreat down the mountain pass, and felt nothing. The most powerful cattle baron in the territory, owner of 10,000 acres, employer of 40 men, possessor of wealth most could only dream of, couldn't buy what he'd stopped believing existed, a reason to let someone stay. Before we begin this story of the man who refused every bride until one woman asked for nothing, I invite you to join me on this journey. If this tale speaks to you, please leave a like and comment with your city. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let's step into the frozen heart of 1880s Montana. The wind that carved through the Bitterroot Valley didn't care about wealth. It tore through Caleb Hawthorne's land with the same merciless indifference it showed the poorest homesteaders claim, turning the vast Montana territory into a study in white and gray, where sky bled into snow and only the dark spine of the mountains broke the monotony. Caleb stood on the wide porch of his ranch house, a structure his men called the fortress, for its imposing stone construction and the emotional walls its owner maintained, and watched the weather roll in from the west. February in Montana Territory, 1883. 23 degrees below freezing, cattle huddled in the protected valleys, horses stamped in the barn, smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney in a thin, determined line, and somewhere on the eastern road, another woman was probably being told she'd wasted her time. "Boss, the fence crew's asking about the north pasture." Caleb didn't turn at the sound of Wade's voice. His foreman had learned years ago that Caleb heard everything, processed everything, responded to what mattered. "Tell them to reinforce the post near Timber Creek. That section took damage in the December storm." "Already told them." Wade stepped closer, his boots crunching on ice-crusted boards. "I'm asking because they're wondering if you want it done now or after the Carrington girl leaves." There it was. The question beneath the question. The entire ranch pretending they weren't watching another chapter in what had become local legend, Caleb Hawthorne and his parade of rejected brides. "There is no after." Caleb's voice carried the flat certainty of stone. "She'll be gone by supper, like the rest." "You haven't even met her yet." "I've met 19 versions of her. Beautiful, accomplished, backed by powerful families who think my land makes me desperate." He finally turned, his eyes, the pale gray of winter sky, meeting Wade's. "I'm not desperate. I'm particular." Wade, a weathered man of 50, with more sense than to argue with his employer about most things, shook his head slowly. "You're 34 years old, Caleb. This ranch will outlive you, and then what? All this land, all this work, and no one to pass it to? Then it gets divided among the men who helped build it. You, Marcus, Tom. The hands who've been here since we had 300 head instead of 3,000. Caleb turned back to the landscape, dismissing the conversation. "Now tell the fence crew to work. Weather's only getting worse." Wade left without another word, but Caleb felt the weight of his foreman's concern long after the door closed. The same concern that radiated from every corner of his domain, from the barn where his stable master worried, from the bunkhouse where his ranch hand speculated, from the kitchen where his cook, Martha, made pointed comments about empty tables and silent rooms. They didn't understand. How could they? They saw his wealth, his success, his control over one of the most prosperous operations in Montana Territory. They saw a man who had everything except a wife and assumed it was the missing piece. What they didn't see was the scar tissue, the lesson learned, the price he'd paid for believing in something as foolish as love. Autumn. The Carrington carriage arrived precisely at noon, announced by the sound of horses' hooves on frozen ground and the jingle of expensive tack. Caleb remained in his office, a calculated strategy. Let them wait. Let them understand that here, on his land, his time moved according to his priorities, not their expectations. Through the window, he watched the proceedings with detached interest. A driver in formal livery, 2 outriders for protection. The carriage itself was burgundy with gold trim, the kind of vehicle that announced wealth without subtlety. The door opened, and a woman emerged in layers of winter silk, her dark hair arranged in elaborate coils beneath a feathered hat, her face beautiful in the precise, constructed way that money could buy. Martha appeared at his office door. "The Carrington party is in the parlor, Mr. Hawthorne." "Let them have coffee. I'll be there when I'm finished with these ledgers." Martha's expression suggested she knew exactly what he was doing, but she retreated without comment. Good. He employed people who understood the value of discretion. Caleb made them wait 20 minutes, long enough to establish his lack of urgency, not long enough to be genuinely rude. When he finally entered the parlor, he found the scene he'd witnessed 19 times before. A young woman seated with perfect posture, her father or chaperone beside her, both wearing expressions that mixed hope with carefully concealed calculation. "Mr. Hawthorne." The older man, Senator Carrington, according to the letter that had announced this visit, rose with practiced political grace. "A pleasure to finally meet you. Your reputation precedes you." "Senator," Caleb shook his hand with the minimum pressure required for civility, "I'm afraid you've made a long journey for nothing. I'm not interested in marriage arrangements." The senator's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise that Caleb would be so direct, perhaps. Or annoyance that his political influence wasn't producing the usual deference. "My daughter, Charlotte, wanted very much to meet you. Perhaps you might spare a few moments for conversation before we depart." It was the same script, delivered with different accents, the father's pride barely masking his ambition, the daughter's carefully arranged features suggesting demure interest, the whole performance designed to make him feel like the final decision was his, while gently herding him toward the predetermined conclusion. Caleb looked at Charlotte Carrington properly for the first time. She was perhaps 22, with the kind of beauty that required maintenance. Expensive clothes, elaborate hairstyling, the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day in her life. Her eyes met his with confidence born of knowing she was desirable, that doors opened for her, that men competed for her favor. "Miss Carrington, do you know anything about cattle ranching?" The question clearly wasn't what she'd expected. She glanced at her father before responding. I'm sure I could learn, Mr. Hawthorne." "Do you ride?" "Side saddle, yes. I'm quite accomplished." "Can you shoot?" "I don't see why a woman would need—" "Can you deliver a calf in the middle of a February blizzard? Can you tend a fence line in weather that'll freeze your fingers in minutes? Can you look at a sick steer and know whether it's salvageable or needs to be put down?" He kept his voice level, not cruel, just factual. "This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Carrington. It's Montana territory. The land doesn't care about your accomplishments in needlework or piano. It'll kill you if you're not prepared." Senator Carrington's face reddened. "Mr. Hawthorne, my daughter wasn't raised to be a ranch hand." "Then she wasn't raised to be a rancher's wife." Caleb turned his attention back to Charlotte. "You're a beautiful, accomplished woman. You'll make some politician or industrialist very happy. But you don't want this life. You want the idea of it, the romance of the frontier, the story you can tell at dinner parties back east. You don't want the reality of it, the isolation, the work, the months when the only people you see are rough men who smell like cattle and sweat." Charlotte's composure finally cracked, her eyes bright with humiliation. "You don't know anything about what I want." "You're right. I don't. Just like you don't know anything about me beyond what your father's political connections told him." Caleb moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. "I apologize for wasting your time. Martha will see you out. I hope your journey back is safe." He left the parlor before they could respond, already knowing how the scene would play out. Wounded pride. Indignant departure. A letter from the senator suggesting Caleb had been rude, inappropriate, unworthy of the opportunity he'd been offered. Add it to the pile. Bimas. That evening, Caleb sat alone in his office while the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythm. Through the walls, he could hear the distant sounds of men finishing their day, boots on wooden floors, laughter from the bunkhouse, the whinny of a horse being led to the barn, the sounds of community, of people living and working together. Sounds that stopped at his door. Wade appeared with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, helping himself to a chair without waiting for invitation. Another privilege of 15 years' partnership. He poured 2 fingers in each glass and slid one across the desk. "How'd it go with the Carrington girl?" "The same way it always goes." Caleb took a drink, feeling the burn settle in his chest. She was beautiful, well-educated, utterly wrong. They can't all be utterly wrong, Caleb. 20 women? 19. 20 counting today. Wade leaned back, studying his employer with the frank assessment of someone who'd earned the right. At some point, you've got to wonder if the problem isn't them. Caleb's hand tightened on his glass, but his voice remained steady. The problem is that every single one of them sees me as a prize to be won, a territory to be claimed. They look at this ranch and see status, security, a good story. None of them see me. Maybe because you don't let them. I let them see exactly what matters. I ask them practical questions about the life they'd actually be living. And every time I watch them realize they don't want it. They want the fantasy, the idea of taming the wild Montana rancher. He drank again. I won't be someone's adventure, Wade. I won't be the interesting chapter in some society woman's life story. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happened with Catherine happened a long time ago. The name landed like a physical blow, even after all these years. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from his foreman. It happened long enough ago that I learned my lesson. Love is a transaction. People stay until they find something better. Catherine was just honest about it. She was young and stupid and scared of frontier life. That doesn't mean everyone, it means I won't make the same mistake. Caleb set down his glass with careful precision. I built this ranch from nothing, Wade. 300 acres my father left me, and a dream that most people said was impossible. I made it work through discipline, focus, and never letting sentiment cloud my judgment. I'm not about to start now. So you'll spend the rest of your life alone in this big house, surrounded by land and cattle and nothing that matters? The land matters. The cattle matter. The men who work this ranch matter. Caleb met Wade's eyes. What doesn't matter is pretending that some arranged marriage to a woman I don't know will somehow fill whatever emptiness everyone seems to think I'm suffering from. I'm not suffering. I'm content. Wade stood, picking up the whiskey bottle. Content is just another word for giving up, boss. But it's your life. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're particular. I think you're scared. And I think Catherine hurt you worse than you'll ever admit. The door closed behind him, leaving Caleb alone with the echo of words he couldn't quite refute. The winter deepened. February became March. And March brought the kind of storms that reminded everyone Montana Territory wasn't civilized, wasn't tamed, wasn't done killing people who underestimated it. Caleb threw himself into work with the same focused intensity that had built his empire. Fence lines, calving season preparations, feed inventory, contract negotiations with buyers in Helena and Butte. The work was endless, and that was exactly what he wanted. Exhaustion left no room for Wade's questions or Martha's concerned looks, or the whispers he pretended not to hear when he passed groups of ranch hands. The boss turned away another one. 20 women. Can you imagine? I heard she was the prettiest one yet. Pretty don't matter if you're made of ice. He wasn't made of ice. That was the problem. Ice would have been easier. Ice didn't remember Catherine's laugh, or the way she'd looked at him in those early days, before his ambition scared her, before the isolation wore her down, before she'd left with a railroad man who promised her San Francisco and society and everything Montana Territory couldn't provide. Ice didn't wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and feel the weight of the empty house pressing down like snow on a weak roof. But Ice also didn't get hurt again, didn't make the mistake of believing in promises that people couldn't keep, didn't confuse temporary attraction for something permanent. So he worked, rode fence lines until his hands cramped from the cold, helped deliver calves in the freezing dark of pre-dawn, checked on his men, his stock, his land, built his fortress higher with every passing day. Well, it was mid-March when Wade brought news that stopped Caleb mid-stride across the yard. There's someone at the gate. Caleb didn't slow. Tell them I'm not receiving visitors. If it's another arranged bride, the answer is no before they even ask. It's not a carriage this time, boss. Wade's voice carried a note that made Caleb finally stop. It's a woman on horseback, alone. Says she needs to speak with you. Won't say about what. Alone? In this weather? Caleb turned, scanning the horizon. Storm clouds gathered to the west, the kind that meant serious snow by nightfall. Where's she from? Don't know. She's not dressed fancy. Not dressed for Montana winter either. She'll freeze if she tries to ride out now. Caleb considered for a moment. Every instinct said to refuse, to send her away like all the others. But a woman alone on the frontier, underdressed for the weather, with night and a storm coming. Put her in the barn. Give her hot coffee. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He finished his conversation with the stable master about a lame mare, refusing to hurry despite his curiosity. Control meant not jumping when others expected it. Control meant maintaining his priorities regardless of circumstance. But when he finally walked to the barn, something felt different. He couldn't name it, couldn't point to any objective fact, but the air itself seemed to carry a charge of change. The barn was warm with animal heat and smelled of hay, leather, and horse. He found Wade near the tack room, holding a steaming cup and talking quietly to someone Caleb couldn't see from his angle. "Boss is here," Wade said, stepping aside. The woman who turned to face him wasn't what Caleb expected. No elaborate dress or carefully arranged hair. No jewelry or fine fabrics. She wore a simple wool coat that had seen hard use, a plain dress beneath it, and boots that were practical rather than fashionable. Her hair, brown with hints of copper in the lamplight, was pulled back in a simple braid. Her hands wrapped around the coffee cup were red from cold, the kind of chapped, work-roughened hands that spoke of labor. But it was her eyes that caught him. Brown, direct, holding none of the calculated charm or demure performance he'd learned to recognize. She looked at him the way Wade looked at a difficult horse, assessing, careful, honest. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you for seeing me." Her voice was quiet but steady, with an accent that suggested education but no particular region. "My name is Emma Reed. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "Miss Reed." He studied her, trying to place her in the familiar categories. Not wealthy enough to be another political alliance. Not desperate enough to be seeking employment. Not polished enough to be a confidence artist. "What brings you to my ranch in the middle of a Montana winter?" "I heard you've been refusing brides." The directness of it surprised him into silence for a moment. She didn't smile, didn't perform embarrassment or coyness, just stated the fact like discussing the weather. "News travels fast," he said finally. "When a powerful man turns away 20 women, it becomes a story. The man who can't be bought. The rancher who refuses every offer." She took a sip of coffee, her hand still trembling slightly from the cold. "I wanted to meet the man behind the story." "Why?" It was the same question he'd asked the others, but this time he genuinely wanted to know the answer. There was something in the way she stood, straight but not rigid, present but not pushing, that suggested she wasn't following a script. Emma was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Caleb saw something flicker across her face. Not calculation, something raw, something that looked almost like recognition. "Because I recognize loneliness when I see it," she said finally, "and I thought maybe you'd recognize it too." The words hit harder than any practiced charm or beautiful face ever had. Not because they were clever, but because they were true. Standing in his warm barn, surrounded by his wealth and success, and the fortress he'd built, Caleb felt stripped bare by 6 simple words. "I recognize loneliness when I see it." "You rode out here alone, underdressed for the weather, with a storm coming, to tell me I'm lonely?" He kept his voice level, refusing to show how deeply she'd unsettled him. "I rode out here because I've spent 3 years being lonely in different ways, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter. I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people who don't see me." She set down the coffee cup, meeting his eyes directly. "You asked all those other women practical questions. Let me ask you one. When's the last time someone actually saw you? Not your ranch, not your money, not the story everyone tells about the impossible Caleb Hawthorne. When did someone last look at you and see the person underneath?" The question hung in the air between them, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and wind beginning to rise outside. Caleb wanted to dismiss it, to deflect with sarcasm, or return to the safe territory of practical matters. But he couldn't, because she was still looking at him with those steady, honest eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, someone was asking him about himself instead of asking for something from him. "I don't know," he heard himself say. "A long time." Emma nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "Then Maybe we have that in common. Being invisible while everyone looks at us. You're not making much sense, Miss Reed. I know, I'm not good at this. She glanced down at her hands, then back up at him. I didn't come here to ask to marry you or to make some kind of arrangement. I came because I heard about a man who keeps refusing people, and I wondered if maybe he was refusing them for the same reason I kept refusing to pretend I was fine. Because sometimes the wrong thing offered kindly is worse than nothing at all. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, like ice cracking under pressure. This woman, this stranger who'd appeared at his gate with storm clouds gathering, was saying things he'd never spoken aloud, naming things he'd buried under work and discipline and the careful construction of a life that looked successful from the outside. Miss Reed, there's a storm coming. You can't ride out in this weather. I know. I misjudged the distance and the cold. She smiled, a small, rueful expression. I'm not very good at Montana yet. I've only been here 6 months. Where are you staying? A boarding house in town. I work at the general store. Or I did until yesterday, when Mrs. Patterson decided I was too quiet and made customers nervous. The smile turned sadder. Apparently being competent isn't enough if you're not good at small talk. Wade, who'd been standing quietly near the tack room, cleared his throat. Boss, I can have Marcus ready the guest room in the house. Can't send her back out in this. It was the practical solution, the only solution really, unless Caleb wanted to risk a woman freezing to death on the road from his ranch. But having her in his house, even temporarily, felt dangerous in ways he couldn't quite articulate. The guest room is fine, he said finally, but I expect you to leave as soon as the weather clears. Of course. Emma picked up her coffee again, and Caleb noticed her hands had stopped shaking. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Hawthorne. I promise I won't make assumptions about what it means. See that you don't. He left the barn before she could respond, walking back to the house through wind that now carried the first sharp sting of snow. Behind him, he could hear Wade giving Emma directions, his foreman's voice carrying the kind of gentle courtesy he rarely showed strangers. Caleb stood on his porch, watching the storm roll in across land he'd fought for, built on, claimed as his own. Tomorrow, Emma Reed would ride back to town, return to whatever life she'd come from, and this strange conversation would become another story he didn't tell. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, someone would sit at his table who'd looked at him and seen something other than wealth or power, or the character everyone else had decided he should play. Tonight, someone who recognized loneliness would share his space. The snow began to fall in earnest, thick flakes that erased the landscape with ruthless efficiency. Caleb watched it come, feeling the familiar isolation of winter settling in. But this time, just for tonight, the house wouldn't be quite so empty, and he wasn't sure whether that terrified him or gave him something he'd thought he'd lost years ago. Something that might have been hope. Martha met him at the kitchen door with an expression that managed to convey curiosity, concern, and mild disapproval all at once. She'd been with the ranch since Caleb's father's time, had watched him grow from an ambitious boy into the hardened man he'd become, and she possessed the rare ability to read him better than he could read himself. Wade says we have a guest. Just for the night. Storm's too dangerous for her to ride back. Caleb hung his coat on the hook, shaking snow from his shoulders. Put her in the blue room upstairs. She'll need dry clothes if you have anything that'll fit. A woman shows up alone at your gate and you're putting her up for the night? Martha's eyebrows rose. That's not like you. What would you have me do? Send her out to freeze? No, but I've seen you send away senators' daughters without blinking. This one must be different. Martha moved to the stove, ladling stew into bowls with practiced efficiency. What's her name? Emma Reed. Says she works at the general store in town, or did until yesterday. Reed, Martha paused, her face thoughtful. I know that name. There was talk in town a few months back. Young woman, widowed, came west alone. Mrs. Patterson at the store took her on out of charity, then complained she was too quiet, too strange. She set the bowls on the table. People said she was running from something. Caleb felt a flicker of unease. Running from what? No one knew, but a woman doesn't come to Montana territory alone unless she's desperate or hiding, sometimes both. Martha met his eyes. You be careful with this one, Caleb. Desperate people do desperate things. She's staying one night, Martha. That's all. The knock at the kitchen door interrupted whatever response Martha might have made. Wade appeared with Emma, her coat now dusted white with snow, her face pinched from the cold. In the warm kitchen light, Caleb could see details he'd missed in the barn, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of poor sleep, the thinness that suggested too many skipped meals, the quiet exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. Miss Reed, this is Martha. She runs the household. She'll show you to your room and find you something warm to wear. Caleb kept his voice neutral, professional. Supper's in an hour. Emma looked at the bowls of stew on the table and something flickered across her face. Hunger, maybe, or gratitude, or something more complicated. Thank you. I don't want to be any trouble. Too late for that, Martha said, but her voice was kind. Come on, dear. Let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death. The two women disappeared up the back stairs, leaving Caleb alone with Wade, who made no move to leave despite the clear dismissal in his employer's posture. She's not what you expected, Wade observed. I didn't expect anything. Exactly. Every other woman who's come here, you knew what they wanted before they opened their mouths. This one? Wade shook his head slowly. This one's different. Can't quite figure her angle. Maybe she doesn't have an angle. Even as Caleb said it, he heard Martha's warning echo in his mind. Desperate people do desperate things. Everyone has an angle, boss. Question is whether hers is dangerous or just sad. Wade moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think she's here to trap you into marriage. Woman like that, she could have played it smarter. Showed up in better weather, better clothes, with a better story. Then what is she here for? Wade's expression turned thoughtful. Maybe exactly what she said. To meet the man who keeps saying no. To see if the story's true. He pulled on his hat. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Sometimes people are just lonely and looking for someone who understands. After Wade left, Caleb stood in his kitchen, the heart of a house that always felt too big, too quiet, and tried to make sense of what was happening. In the space of an hour, his carefully controlled world had been disrupted by a woman who didn't fit any of his categories. Not wealthy, not beautiful in the polished way the others had been, not performing any of the expected scripts. Just honest in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. He heard footsteps on the stairs, lighter than Martha's heavy tread. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing one of Martha's simple dresses, her hair still damp from washing, her feet bare against the wooden floor. Without the heavy coat and wind-chapped complexion, she looked younger than he'd first thought. Late 20s, perhaps. And there was something about the way she moved, careful, contained, as if she'd learned to take up as little space as possible. Martha said to come down. That supper was ready. She stayed in the doorway, not quite entering the room. If you'd prefer I eat upstairs, I understand. I know this wasn't what you planned for your evening. Sit. Caleb gestured to the table, where Martha had set 3 places despite his earlier insistence that Emma would eat alone in her room. Martha doesn't tolerate people eating separately in this house. Says it's uncivilized. Emma moved to the table with the same careful quality, lowering herself into the chair as if she expected it might disappear. Martha appeared with bread, butter, and a pot of coffee, her presence filling the kitchen with a kind of bustling warmth that Caleb had long since stopped noticing until it was contrasted with Emma's quiet stillness. Eat before it gets cold, Martha commanded, serving them both with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd been feeding ranch hands for 30 years. And don't be shy about seconds. We've got plenty. They ate in silence for several minutes. Caleb watched Emma from the corner of his eye, noting how she ate with steady purpose. Not the delicate picking of the society women who'd visited, but the practical consumption of someone who'd known hunger and didn't take food for granted. She finished her first bowl before he was halfway through his, and when Martha refilled it without asking, Emma's quiet, "Thank you," carried the weight of genuine gratitude. You said you'd been in Montana 6 months, Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. Where were you before? Emma's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, her eyes meeting his with that same direct honesty that had unsettled him in the barn. Kansas, a small town called Millbrook. You wouldn't have heard of it. Why'd you leave? The question hung in the air. Martha had paused her own eating, her attention focused on Emma with the sharp awareness of someone who knew how to read people. Emma's hands tightened briefly on the table's edge, then relaxed with visible effort. My husband died 2 years ago. Farming accident. The land was in his family's name, and his brother made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay. She spoke with the flat tone of someone reciting facts they'd long since stopped feeling. I had no family, no means to fight for what little rights I might have had. So I left, and came to Montana Territory alone. Caleb kept his voice neutral, but he was calculating. A widow with no protection, no resources, showing up at a wealthy rancher's door. It fit a pattern he'd seen before. Desperation masked as something else. I came to Montana because it was far enough away that his brother's reach wouldn't follow. I worked as a seamstress in Helena for a year, saved enough to try establishing myself somewhere smaller. Mrs. Patterson's advertisement seemed like an opportunity. Emma's smile was bitter. Turned out she wanted someone chatty, someone who'd gossip with customers and make them feel comfortable. I'm not good at that. Never have been. Why not? Martha asked, her voice gentler than Caleb expected. Because after my husband died, I learned that people's kindness had conditions. They'd help you if you performed grief the right way, if you smiled enough to make them comfortable, if you didn't remind them too much of their own mortality. Emma picked up her spoon again, stirring her stew without eating. I got tired of performing, so I stopped. And people decided I was strange. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. He understood that exhaustion, that decision to stop pretending, to stop giving people what they expected at the cost of whatever authenticity remained. He'd made the same choice after Catherine, after he'd learned that love was just another transaction, and people left when the cost outweighed the benefit. What was your husband like? He asked, surprising himself. Emma looked up, clearly not expecting the question. For a moment, something raw crossed her face. Not grief, exactly, but something more complicated. Loss mixed with relief, mixed with guilt for feeling relieved. He was troubled. Good days and bad days, toward the end, mostly bad days. She spoke carefully, choosing words like stepping stones across dangerous water. The accident wasn't really an accident. He walked into that combine harvester knowing exactly what would happen, and I should have seen it coming, should have known how bad it had gotten. The confession fell into silence. Martha's expression softened with sympathy, but Caleb found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn by the honesty of it. No performance, no careful construction of the sympathetic widow, just the messy truth of survival and guilt and whatever complicated emotions remained. That's not your fault, Martha said quietly. I know. Logically, I know. Emma's hands tightened around her spoon. But knowing something and feeling it are different things, and sometimes late at night I still wonder if I could have said something different, done something different, been something different that would have made him want to stay. Caleb understood that too, the late night wondering, the replay of moments, searching for the place where you could have changed the outcome. He'd done it with Catherine for months after she'd left, dissecting their conversations, their arguments, looking for the moment he'd failed to be whatever she needed. You can't save people from themselves, he heard himself say, no matter how much you want to. Emma's eyes found his across the table, and in them he saw recognition. Not pity, not curiosity, but the simple acknowledgement of someone who'd learned the same hard lesson. No, she agreed softly. You can't. Martha cleared the dishes with perhaps more noise than necessary, breaking the moment. I'll bring coffee to the parlor. Miss Reed, you're welcome to join Mr. Hawthorne by the fire. It's warmer there than upstairs, and the storm sounds like it's settling in for the night. Before either of them could protest, Martha had disappeared into the pantry, leaving them alone in the kitchen with the sound of wind battering the windows and the crackle of the stove. Caleb stood, gesturing toward the hallway. The parlor's this way, unless you'd prefer to retire. I'm not tired. Emma rose, following him through the house he'd built to be impressive and had succeeded only in making empty. The parlor was his concession to civilization. Leather furniture, a stone fireplace that could heat the entire first floor, shelves lined with books he actually read rather than displayed for show. A fire already burned in the grate, Martha's doing, banking it to last through the night. Emma moved to the bookshelves with the focused interest of someone who genuinely cared about their contents. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in the firelight. You have Shakespeare, Dickens, Cooper. She pulled out a worn volume of Whitman, its pages soft from repeated reading, and poetry. I wouldn't have expected that. Why? Because I'm a rancher, I can't appreciate literature? No. Because you seem like someone who's trying very hard not to feel anything, and poetry makes you feel things whether you want to or not. She opened the book carefully, finding a page marked with a faded ribbon. This one's been read many times. Caleb knew which poem it was without looking. Song of Myself. He'd found it in his early 20s, back when he still believed in the future Whitman described, in the possibility of becoming, of growing, of finding yourself in the vast American landscape. I celebrate myself and sing myself, Emma read softly. And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me is good, belongs to you. She looked up from the page. Did you believe that once? That we all belong to each other? I believed a lot of things once. What changed? I grew up, learned that people don't belong to each other. They use each other, and when the using is done, they move on. Emma closed the book, holding it against her chest like a shield. That's a lonely way to see the world. It's an honest way. Honesty and loneliness aren't mutually exclusive, Mr. Hawthorne. Sometimes they're the same thing. She returned the book to its shelf, her movements careful, deliberate. You asked me earlier why I came here. The truth is, I've been lonely for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be anything else. And then I heard about you, the man who refuses everyone, who can't be bought or bargained with, who just keeps saying no. And I thought maybe you understood. Understood what? That sometimes the wrong companionship is worse than being alone. That sometimes it's better to have nothing than to have something that makes you smaller. She turned to face him, the firelight casting shadows across her features. My husband made me smaller every day. With every disappointment, every bad day, every moment I had to be less than I was, so he could feel like more than he was. And when he died, I felt guilty for feeling relieved. What kind of person does that make me? Human. The word came out rougher than Caleb intended. It makes you human. Emma's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry, just stood there in his parlor, holding herself together with the same careful control he recognized in his own posture, his own deliberately neutral expression. The women who came before me, she said quietly, they wanted something from you, your name, your money, your status. I understand why you sent them away. What do you want, Miss Reed? She was quiet for a long moment, the wind outside filling the silence with its howling voice. Then, I want to know if it's possible to be alone but not lonely, to build a life that doesn't require you to be smaller than you are, to look at another person and be seen for who you actually are instead of who they need you to be. I don't have answers to those questions. I know, but maybe... She trailed off, then tried again. Maybe we could figure it out together, not as husband and wife, not as some arrangement, just as two people who understand what it costs to protect yourself from being hurt again. Caleb moved to the window, looking out at the storm that had buried his land in white. Behind him, he could feel Emma's presence, not demanding, not pushing, just there, honest and quiet, and more dangerous to his carefully constructed walls than any of the beautiful, polished women who'd tried to breach them with charm and strategy. You should go to bed, Miss Reed. Morning will come early, and you have a long ride back to town. Of course. He heard her move toward the door, then pause. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Hawthorne, and for listening. I know you didn't ask for any of this. After she left, Caleb stood at the window for a long time, watching snow erase the world. He thought about loneliness and honesty, about the price of protection and the cost of letting someone see you. He thought about Catherine, who'd wanted him to be smaller than he was, and about the 19 women he'd sent away for wanting him to be larger than any person could sustain. And he thought about Emma Reed, who'd asked for nothing except to be understood. The storm raged through the night, and Caleb barely slept. He kept hearing her voice, her questions, her willingness to name things he'd spent years refusing to acknowledge. When dawn finally broke gray and cold, he found himself dreading her departure in ways he couldn't quite explain. Martha was already in the kitchen when he came down, her expression knowing. She's still asleep. Poor thing was exhausted. Let her rest. Road won't be safe until midday anyway, with all this snow. Mm-hmm. Martha poured coffee with elaborate casualness. And if the road's not safe by midday, then she stays another night. And if it's not safe the next day? Caleb turned to face his housekeeper, finding her watching him with something between concern and hope. What are you getting at, Martha? Just wondering if maybe you found something you didn't know you were looking for. She handed him the coffee. That girl upstairs, she's not like the others. She's not trying to trap you or use you. She's just tired and lonely and looking for someone who understands. Seems to me you might be those things too. One night, Martha. That's all this is. Keep telling yourself that, Caleb Hawthorne. Keep building those walls higher and higher until you suffocate behind them. She turned back to her stove. Or maybe, just maybe, you could try being honest with yourself for once. That woman saw you last night. Really saw you. And instead of running away from it, she stayed. The words hit harder than Caleb wanted to admit. He took his coffee to his office, burying himself in ledgers and accounts, trying to ignore the awareness of Emma sleeping upstairs, of the way his house felt different with her in it. Not invaded exactly, just less empty. She came down around mid-morning, dressed again in her own clothes, her hair braided simply, her face showing the benefits of a full night's sleep. She found him in his office, knocking softly on the doorframe. I don't want to disturb you, but I wanted to thank you again before I left. For everything. Caleb looked up from his ledgers, taking in the sight of her. In daylight, he could see the strength beneath the quiet exterior, the set of her shoulders, the steadiness in her gaze, the quality of someone who'd survived things that should have broken her. The road's still dangerous. You should wait until afternoon. I don't want to impose any longer than necessary. It's not an imposition, it's common sense. He set down his pen. Besides, Martha would never forgive me if I sent you out before you'd had a proper meal. Emma's smile was small but genuine. She's very kind. You're lucky to have her. I know. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the morning light streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes and the careful distance they'd both constructed between themselves and the world. Can I ask you something, Mr. Hawthorne? Caleb. If you're going to stay in my house, even temporarily, you might as well use my name. Caleb, then. She said it carefully, testing the shape of it. Why did you really turn away all those women? Was it just because they wanted something from you? He considered deflecting, returning to the safety of his ledgers and the walls he'd built. But Emma had given him honesty last night, raw, uncomfortable honesty about grief and guilt and the complexity of survival. Maybe she deserved the same. I turned them away because none of them saw me. They saw the ranch, the money, the status. They saw the story everyone tells about the impossible Caleb Hawthorne who built an empire from nothing. He met her eyes. But none of them looked at me and saw the person who's terrified of being hurt again. The person who still wakes up some nights and remembers what it felt like to believe in something, only to watch it leave. They saw the fortress, Emma. None of them saw the man hiding inside it. Her expression softened with understanding, with recognition, with the kind of empathy that came from having felt the same thing. I see you, she said quietly, for whatever that's worth. And the terrifying part was, Caleb believed her. This woman who'd appeared at his gate with nothing, asking for nothing, offering only the simple gift of being seen and seeing in return. Stay for lunch, he heard himself say. The road will be safer by then anyway. Emma nodded, and in that small gesture, something shifted. Not romance, not the beginning of some grand love story, but something quieter and potentially more dangerous. The beginning of trust. Lunch stretched into afternoon, an afternoon into the golden slant of late winter light that turned the snow-covered landscape into something almost beautiful. Emma had offered to help Martha in the kitchen, not the performative offer of a guest trying to seem useful, but the natural movement of someone accustomed to work. Caleb watched from his office doorway as the two women moved around each other with easy rhythm, Emma's quiet competence earning Martha's approval in ways no amount of polite conversation ever could. She knows her way around a kitchen, Martha observed when Emma had gone upstairs to fetch something from her room. And she doesn't waste. See how she used every bit of those vegetables? Girl's known hard times. She told you about her husband? Didn't have to. I can see it in how she holds herself, like she's always waiting for the next blow. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, her expression thoughtful. But she's not broken, Caleb. That's the difference. She's bent, maybe, scarred, but not broken. Caleb thought about that as he returned to his office, the distinction between broken and bent. He'd assumed for years that Catherine had broken something in him, that her leaving had shattered whatever capacity he'd had for trust. But maybe Martha was right. Maybe he was just bent, shaped by experience into something harder and more guarded, but not actually destroyed. The question was whether bent things could ever straighten again. Emma appeared in his doorway as the afternoon light began to fade, her coat folded over her arm. The road should be clear enough now. I should go before it gets dark. Caleb looked at the window, at the long shadows stretching across the snow. She was right. If she left now, she'd make it back to town before full dark. It was the sensible thing, the appropriate thing. Let her go, return to his careful solitude, pretend this disruption had never happened. Or you could stay for supper, he said instead. Ride out first thing tomorrow when the road's completely clear and you can see any ice patches. Emma studied him for a long moment, and Caleb had the uncomfortable sensation of being read, of having his motivations examined and understood in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged himself. Why are you asking me to stay, Caleb? The question was gentle but direct, and it deserved an honest answer. Because I haven't had a conversation like the one we had last night in longer than I can remember. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me and seen past the walls. Because... He paused, searching for words that didn't make him sound desperate or weak. Because I'm not ready for you to leave yet. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable in a way that made Caleb want to take it back, to retreat behind sarcasm or practicality. But Emma's expression softened, and she set her coat down on the chair. Then I'll stay. But Caleb, you need to understand something. I'm not here to fix you, or save you, or be whatever it is you think you need. I'm barely holding myself together most days. I can't be responsible for your happiness. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just asking you to stay for supper. Just supper? Just supper, he confirmed, though they both knew it was already more than that. The evening settled around them with surprising ease. Wade came in from the fields with news of a fence section that needed repair, did a double take at seeing Emma still there, but was smart enough not to comment. Martha served a meal that was somehow both simple and abundant: roast chicken, potatoes, winter greens from the cold storage, and for the first time in years, Caleb's dining table didn't feel absurdly large for one person. How long have you worked for Caleb? Emma asked Wade, her question carrying genuine interest rather than polite filler. 15 years, give or take, since this place was barely more than a dream and 300 acres of stubborn land. Wade helped himself to more potatoes, his weathered face creasing with memory. He was just a kid then, really, 20 years old with more ambition than sense and his daddy's debt hanging over his head. Wade likes to tell the story where I'm young and foolish, Caleb interjected. Leaves out the part where he was the only one willing to take a chance on that young fool. Someone had to. You were determined to either build an empire or die trying. Wade's tone was affectionate beneath the gruffness. Spent the first 2 years sleeping in the barn because every penny went back into cattle and land. Martha about had my head when she found out I'd let him do that. You let him sleep in a barn? Emma looked at Caleb with something between surprise and understanding. While building all this? Had to build the herd before I could build the house. Priorities. Caleb felt oddly self-conscious under her gaze, as if she were recalculating him based on this information. Besides, I was young. Didn't need much. Needed more than you'd admit to, Martha muttered. Stubborn as a mule, then. Stubborn as a mule now. Emma smiled, and Caleb noticed how it changed her face, softened the guardedness, revealed hints of who she might have been before life taught her to be careful. What made you decide to build a ranch here? Montana Territory is not exactly welcoming to people trying to start from nothing. That's exactly why. Caleb set down his fork, surprised to find himself wanting to explain. Back east, Everything was already claimed, already established. Your family name mattered more than your work. Here, the land didn't care who your father was or what mistakes you'd made. It only cared if you were strong enough to survive it. And were you? Strong enough? Some days barely. Other days I wasn't sure I wanted to be. He met her eyes across the table. But Wade wouldn't let me quit, and the land kept demanding things from me. And eventually I realized I'd built something worth keeping. Worth keeping, but not worth sharing, Wade observed quietly. The words landed with precision, opening up the subject they'd all been dancing around. Caleb felt his shoulders tense, the familiar defensiveness rising. But before he could deflect, Emma spoke. I think I understand that. Sometimes the things we build from nothing feel too precious to risk. Like if you let someone in, they might destroy what you fought so hard to create. She turned her glass slowly on the table. My husband used to say I cared more about my garden than I did about him. And maybe that was true toward the end. The garden couldn't disappoint me, couldn't tell me I wasn't enough. The vegetables just grew or they didn't, and either way it wasn't personal. Martha made a soft sound of sympathy, but it was Wade who spoke. What kind of man tells his wife she isn't enough? The kind who's drowning and needs someone to blame for it. Emma's voice was steady, but Caleb could hear the old hurt beneath it. I tried to save him, tried so hard, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. All you can do is go down with them or learn to swim away. Swimming away takes courage, Caleb said quietly. So does building something from nothing. She looked at him directly. So does protecting it, even when everyone tells you you're wrong for doing so. The understanding that passed between them was almost tangible. Wade and Martha exchanged glances, but had the wisdom to let the moment settle naturally. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows and reminding them all of the wilderness that surrounded this island of warmth and light. After supper, Wade excused himself to check on the evening barn routine, and Martha disappeared into the kitchen with pointed determination, leaving Caleb and Emma alone in the parlor once more. The fire crackled, throwing shadows that danced across the walls, and Caleb found himself acutely aware of Emma's presence beside him. Not crowding, not demanding, just there. Tell me about her, Emma said softly. The woman who made you decide never to let anyone in again. Caleb's first instinct was to refuse, to deflect, to retreat behind the walls that had served him well for so many years. But Emma had given him her truth, had laid bare her own wounds and failures. Maybe he owed her the same honesty. Her name was Catherine. We met when I was 22, just starting to make something of this place. She was visiting family in Helena, and I was there buying breeding stock. He stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood. She was beautiful, educated, curious about everything, and for some reason I still don't understand, she was interested in me. Why wouldn't she be interested in you? Because I was nobody. A rancher's son trying to turn debt and dirt into something that mattered. She came from old money, old name, the kind of family that expected their daughters to marry lawyers or railroad men, not cowboys covered in dust and cattle shit. Emma didn't flinch at his language. But she chose you anyway. For a while. She moved out here, said she loved the frontier spirit, the rawness of it all. We were happy, I thought. I worked myself half to death building this ranch, and she talked about the life we'd have once it was established. Caleb's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Then her father died, left her a substantial inheritance, and suddenly all her romantic notions about frontier life disappeared. She wanted to go back east, said I could sell the ranch, start over somewhere civilized. But you couldn't? I wouldn't. This place wasn't just a business to me. It was proof that I could be more than what I was born into, that I could build something that mattered. He finally looked at Emma, finding her watching him with quiet attention. She gave me an ultimatum. The ranch or her. I chose the ranch. And she left. She left. Married a railroad executive 6 months later. Last I heard, she's living in San Francisco in a house with 10 bedrooms and servants and everything she wanted. Caleb's laugh was bitter. The irony is, she was right. She would have been miserable here. The isolation, the work, the endless winters. It would have destroyed whatever we had. But for years, I couldn't see that. All I could see was that she'd looked at everything I'd built and decided it wasn't enough. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then, my husband used to say something similar, that I'd chosen my independence over him. My stubborn refusal to need him properly over making him feel important. She turned to face Caleb. And maybe he was right too. Maybe I did hold parts of myself back because I was afraid of losing them. But Caleb, there's a difference between holding yourself back and refusing to destroy yourself for someone else's comfort. Where's the line between those things? I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out for 2 years. She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look younger, more vulnerable. All I know is that by the end, I was so small I barely recognized myself. I'd given up my garden because he said I spent too much time on it. Stopped reading because he felt ignored when I had a book. Stopped visiting the women in town because he was jealous of any relationship that didn't center him. And still, it wasn't enough. That's not love, Emma. That's consumption. I know that now, but when you're in it, when you're trying so hard to make it work, you don't see it happening. You just keep giving pieces of yourself away until one day you look in the mirror and wonder who that stranger is. She rested her chin on her knees. The worst part is, I think he loved me. In his own way. He just loved his pain more, and he needed me to suffer with him to prove I cared. Caleb felt anger rise in his chest. Not at Emma, but at the ghost of a man who'd taken someone bright and curious and systematically dimmed her light. You're better off without him. I know, but knowing that and forgiving myself for feeling relieved when he died are two different things. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting firelight. Do you still love her, Catherine? The question caught him off guard. He started to give an automatic denial, then paused, actually considering it. Did he still love Catherine? Or had he just loved the idea of her, the possibilities she'd represented? I don't think I ever really loved her, he said slowly, working through it as he spoke. I loved that she chose me when I was nobody. I loved the validation of it, the proof that I could be worth something to someone like her. But I don't think I loved her specifically, who she actually was beneath the beauty and the breeding. He met Emma's eyes. Does that make me terrible? No, it makes you human and honest. She shifted, her expression thoughtful. I think I did the same thing with my husband. Loved the idea of being needed, of being essential to someone. It made me feel important in a way nothing else did. But I don't think I loved him either, not really. Not the person he actually was when the performance stopped. They sat with that confession for a while, the fire burning down to embers, the house settling into its nighttime creaks and sighs. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving behind the vast silence of a Montana winter night. I should go to bed, Emma said finally, though she made no move to stand. We've both said too much already, shared too much. Maybe. Caleb found himself reluctant to end the conversation, to return to his usual solitude. Or maybe we've said exactly enough. Emma stood slowly, stretching like a cat. Thank you for listening, for sharing, for not making me feel strange or broken for admitting the truth about my marriage. You're not strange or broken. The words came out more intense than Caleb intended. You're just honest, and that's rarer than you might think. She smiled, that small, genuine expression that transformed her face. Good night, Caleb. I'll leave early tomorrow, before I disrupt your life any more than I already have. After she went upstairs, Caleb remained by the dying fire, turning over their conversation in his mind. Something had shifted between them, some fundamental understanding that went beyond physical attraction or practical arrangement. She saw him, truly saw him, the person beneath the success and the reputation and the carefully constructed walls. And more terrifyingly, he saw her. Not the quiet, broken widow people dismissed, but the resilient, honest woman who'd survived things that should have destroyed her. The realization that came next made his chest tighten with something between fear and hope. He didn't want her to leave tomorrow. Didn't want to return to his empty house, his careful solitude, his protected heart. But wanting her to stay meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant potentially making the same mistakes he'd sworn never to repeat. He was still wrestling with that when Martha appeared, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. You're going to let that girl ride back to town tomorrow, aren't you? Back to that boarding house and a job she doesn't have anymore. What else would I do, Martha? Ask her to stay indefinitely? She's a stranger who showed up 2 days ago. She's not a stranger anymore, Caleb. Not after tonight. Martha settled into the chair Emma had vacated, her expression serious. I've been with this family for 30 years. Watched your father work himself to death trying to prove he was worth something. Watched you do the same thing. And all these years I've kept quiet while you built your fortress and turned away anyone who might actually matter. Martha. No, you listen to me now. That girl upstairs, she's not like the others. She's not here for your money or your name. She's here because she recognized something in you, and you recognize something in her. Are you really going to let her walk away because you're too scared to take a chance? I'm not scared. I'm practical. What kind of life could I offer her? I'm married to this ranch. I work 16-hour days. I have no time for romance or courtship or any of the things a woman deserves. Who said anything about romance? Martha leaned forward. From what I heard at supper, she's not looking for romance either. She's looking for the same thing you are. Someone who sees her for who she actually is. Someone who doesn't need her to be smaller or larger or different than what she is. She stood, preparing to return to her own quarters. At least offer her a job, Caleb. We could use help around here, and she clearly needs one. Give yourself time to figure out if this is something worth pursuing without the pressure of her leaving tomorrow. After Martha left, Caleb sat alone with her words echoing in his mind. A job. It was practical, reasonable. The ranch could use additional help in the house, and Emma clearly needed employment. It didn't have to mean anything more than that. Didn't have to be a declaration of intent or a commitment to something he wasn't ready for. But even as he tried to convince himself of that, he knew it was a lie. Offering Emma a job wasn't about practical necessity. It was about buying time, creating space for whatever was developing between them to either grow or reveal itself as the illusion of two lonely people mistaking recognition for connection. The question was whether he had the courage to take that risk. Morning came too early and too bright, the sun reflecting off fresh snow with blinding intensity. Caleb found Emma already in the kitchen with Martha, both women working in comfortable silence to prepare breakfast. Emma had braided her hair simply, dressed in her traveling clothes, her small bag packed and waiting by the door. She looked up when he entered, her smile warm but tinged with something that might have been regret. Good morning. Martha's been kind enough to pack me food for the journey. Don't need anyone starving on the road, Martha said gruffly, though her eyes were soft when they looked at Emma. Caleb poured coffee, gathering his courage. He'd faced down drought, disease, financial ruin, and brutal winters. He'd built an empire from nothing and defended it against all comers. Surely he could ask one simple question. Before you go, I have a proposition. Emma's hand stilled on the bread she was wrapping. What kind of proposition? The ranch needs help. Martha's been saying so for months, but I've been too stubborn to listen. Someone who can help with the household, the cooking, the accounts. The words came easier once he started, falling into the comfortable territory of business. It's not glamorous work, but it pays fair and includes room and board. You'd have your own space, your own time, no obligations beyond the work itself. He watched Emma's face carefully, trying to read her reaction. Surprise, certainly, but also something else, a flicker of hope quickly tampered by caution. You're offering me a job. Yes. Just a job? Nothing else? Caleb met her eyes directly. Just a job. What it becomes beyond that, if anything, we'd figure out as we go. No promises, no expectations. Just two people who understand each other, working in the same space, seeing what develops naturally. Emma looked at Martha, who was suddenly very focused on her cooking, then back at Caleb. And if nothing develops? If we're just two lonely people who mistook recognition for something more? Then you have a job for as long as you want it, and I have competent help. Either way, we're both better off than we are now. The logic was sound, but they both knew this was about more than logic. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still wrapped around the bread, her expression thoughtful. I need to know something first, she said finally. Are you doing this because you actually want me here, or because you feel sorry for me? I don't feel sorry for you, Emma. You're one of the strongest people I've met. Caleb stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. I'm doing this because for the first time in 8 years, my house doesn't feel empty. Because I had a real conversation instead of a performance. Because I think we might actually be able to help each other figure out how to be something other than lonely. That's not a promise of romance. No, it's not. But it's honest, which is more than either of us has had in a long time. Emma set down the bread, her decision written in the slow deliberateness of her movements. I'll stay, but on one condition. Which is? If either of us decides this isn't working, we're honest about it. No pretending, no performing, no trying to make it into something it's not just because it's comfortable or convenient. She held out her hand. She held out her deal? Caleb took her hand, feeling the roughness of her palm against his, the firm grip of someone who'd learned to stand on her own. Deal. They shook like business partners sealing an arrangement, but Caleb felt the moment settle around them with the weight of something far more significant. A choice made. A risk taken. The beginning of something neither of them could predict or control. Martha turned from the stove, her expression satisfied. Well, now that's settled, you can both stop dancing around each other and eat your breakfast. Emma, you'll take the blue room permanently. I'll help you get properly settled this afternoon. The first week of Emma's employment passed in a careful dance of boundaries and unspoken understanding. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, learning its rhythms and routines without disrupting them. Martha taught her where things were kept, how Caleb preferred his coffee, which accounts needed attention and which could wait. Emma absorbed it all with the focused attention of someone determined to earn her place. Caleb watched this transformation from a distance, maintaining the professional separation they'd agreed upon while being acutely aware of every moment she occupied his space. The way she hummed softly while working in the kitchen, the careful script of her handwriting in the ledgers, the book of poetry she'd borrowed from his library and read by the fire in the evenings, her face soft with concentration. It was Martha who finally broke the careful détente on the 8th day, cornering Caleb in his office with an expression that suggested she'd reached the limit of her patience. This is ridiculous. You're both tiptoeing around each other like strangers when you spent 2 nights having the most honest conversations I've heard in this house since your mother died. We're maintaining appropriate boundaries, Caleb said without looking up from his ledgers. It's what we agreed on. Appropriate boundaries don't mean pretending the other person doesn't exist. You barely speak to her unless it's about work. She calls you Mr. Hawthorne again like she's forgotten your given name. Martha planted her hands on his desk. If you're going to employ the girl, at least treat her like a human being instead of a ghost you're trying to ignore. The criticism stung because it was accurate. After the intimacy of those first conversations, Caleb had retreated into formality, using professional distance as a shield against the vulnerability Emma had exposed. It was safer this way. Cleaner, less likely to end in the kind of messy emotional entanglement he'd sworn to avoid. But it also meant losing the one thing that had made Emma's presence feel different from all the others who'd tried to penetrate his carefully constructed life. The honesty, the recognition, the sense that someone actually saw him. What do you suggest I do, Martha? We're not friends. We're not courting. She works for me. There are proper ways to conduct these relationships. Proper ways to conduct a business relationship, yes. But what you two have isn't just business, and pretending it is serves no one. Martha's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying you need to marry the girl or make grand declarations. I'm saying you could at least talk to her. Share a meal that isn't conducted in silence. Acknowledge that she's more than just competent help. After Martha left, Caleb sat with her words, turning them over like stones worn smooth by a river. She was right, of course. Emma had become something of a phantom in his house, present but carefully unacknowledged beyond the necessities of her work. And in maintaining that distance, he'd lost the very thing that had made him ask her to stay. That evening, he found Emma in the library, curled in the chair he thought of as his, reading the Whitman collection with focused absorption. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you needed the room. I'll go. Stay. Caleb moved to the window, watching the sun set over his land in streaks of orange and pink. I wanted to apologize. I've been distant, formal. That wasn't fair to you. Emma closed the book carefully, marking her place with a strip of paper. You've been exactly what we agreed on. Professional, appropriate, maintaining boundaries. I've been a coward. He turned to face her. I asked you to stay because I wanted to see what might develop between us. But the moment you agreed, I got scared and hid behind formality. That's not honest, and honesty was supposed to be what made this different. What are you afraid of, Caleb? The question was gentle, but it struck at the heart of everything he'd been avoiding. What was he afraid of? That Emma would leave like Catherine had? That she'd disappoint him? That he'd disappoint her? Or was it something deeper, more fundamental? The fear that if he let her in fully, let her see all the broken, complicated parts of him, she'd realize he wasn't worth the effort. I'm afraid of wanting something and having it leave, he said finally. I'm afraid of building something with another person and watching it crumble. I'm afraid that 8 years of protecting myself have made me incapable of anything else. Emma set the book aside and stood, moving closer with the same careful deliberation she brought to everything. I'm afraid of those things too. But Caleb, we're already building something. Every day I'm here, every conversation we don't have, every moment we choose distance over honesty, we're building a pattern. The question is whether it's the pattern we actually want. What pattern do you want? She was close enough now that he could see the shadows under her eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her pulse beat in the hollow of her throat. I want the pattern where we're honest with each other, where we don't have to perform or pretend or hide the messy parts, where if this doesn't work, it's because we tried and failed, not because we were too scared to try at all. Caleb felt something crack in his chest, some piece of the armor he'd worn for so long finally giving way under the steady pressure of her honesty. I don't know if I remember how to do that, how to be that vulnerable with another person. Then we'll figure it out together, like we said we would. Emma reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and took his hand. Her palm was warm, slightly calloused, real in a way that made his breath catch. But we have to actually try, Caleb. We can't hide from each other and call it boundaries. We can't pretend we're just employer and employee when we both know it's already more complicated than that. He looked down at their joined hands, at the physical representation of the risk she was asking him to take. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, to retreat to safety, to protect himself from the inevitable pain of caring about someone who could leave. But under that fear was something else, something that had been dormant so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. The desire to be known, to be seen, to matter to someone beyond what he could provide or build or accomplish. Okay, he said quietly. We try. But Emma, you have to promise me something. What? If this becomes too much, if you need to leave, you tell me. You don't just disappear one day. You don't let guilt or obligation keep you somewhere you don't want to be. He squeezed her hand gently. I'd rather lose you honestly than keep you in a cage of politeness. I promise. But the same goes for you. If I'm not what you need, if this isn't working, you tell me. You don't suffer in silence while I stay here thinking everything's fine. Deal. They stood like that for a moment, hands linked, the library darkening around them as the last light faded from the sky. Then Emma smiled, that small, genuine expression he'd come to recognize as precious. Now that we've cleared the air, would you like to tell me what you think of Whitman? I've been curious what draws you to his poetry. The shift from heavy emotion to casual conversation was exactly what Caleb needed. He released her hand reluctantly and moved to the bookshelf, pulling down the worn volume. He writes about possibility. About the American landscape as a place where you can become something new, something more than what your birth determined. I think I needed that when I was younger, needed to believe that this land could transform me into something worth being. And did it? Transform you? It made me successful, strong, resilient. He opened the book to a familiar passage. But I'm not sure it made me happy. I think somewhere in the pursuit of becoming something, I forgot to figure out what that something should actually be. Emma took the book from him, reading where his finger marked the page. I exist as I am. That is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. She looked up. Do you sit content, Caleb? No, he admitted, but I'm not sure I ever have. Even before Catherine, even when I was building this place and seeing my dreams become real, there was always this sense of incompleteness, like I was working towards something I couldn't quite define. Maybe that's the human condition, always reaching for something just beyond our grasp. She handed the book back. My husband was like that. Never content with what he had, always convinced happiness was just one more thing away, One more acre of land, one more successful harvest, one more year. It killed him, that constant reaching. Is that why you stopped reaching? Why you seem content with so little? I'm not content with little, Caleb. I'm just clear about what actually matters. She moved to the window he'd vacated, looking out at the darkened landscape. After he died, I had nothing. No land, no money, no family, no home. I came to Montana with 2 dresses, a few dollars, and the desperate hope that somewhere far from everything I'd known, I could figure out who I was without someone else defining it for me. And did you? Figure out who you are? I'm still working on it, but I know I'm not the woman who made herself smaller to accommodate someone else's pain. I'm not the wife who gave up everything she loved to prove her devotion. She turned to face him. I'm someone who survived, who's still surviving, who's trying to figure out if there's a difference between survival and actually living. The vulnerability in her voice pulled at something deep in Caleb's chest. He'd spent so long focused on his own wounds, his own carefully guarded heart, that he'd almost forgotten Emma carried her own scars. Different from his, maybe, but no less real. I think you're one of the bravest people I've met, he said quietly. You rode up to a stranger's ranch in the middle of winter with nothing but honesty and hope. That takes courage I'm not sure I have. You have plenty of courage, Caleb. You just direct it at different things, building empires, protecting yourself, maintaining control. She smiled slightly. But maybe it's time to be brave about something else, about letting another person in, about risking the possibility that not everyone will leave. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Caleb felt the familiar fear rise, the instinct to deflect, to retreat, to protect himself from the vulnerability she was asking him to embrace. But he also felt something else, a small, fragile thread of possibility. The idea that maybe, just maybe, Emma was right, that not everyone would leave, that some risks were worth taking. Stay for supper, he said, echoing the words from that first night. Not as my employee, but as whatever we are. Let's figure it out over a meal without Martha chaperoning. Emma's smile widened, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb saw genuine happiness in her expression. I'd like that. They ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, a choice that felt significant in its casualness. Martha had left food warming on the stove before retiring to her own quarters, giving them privacy without making a production of it. Caleb and Emma served themselves, moving around each other with increasing ease, the careful distance of the past week gradually dissolving. Tell me about your garden, Caleb said as they settled at the table. The one your husband resented. Emma's face brightened with memory. It was nothing fancy, just vegetables mostly, and some herbs. But I loved it. Loved the rhythm of planting and tending and harvesting. The way you could put a seed in the ground and trust that with enough care and time, it would become something nourishing. She played with her fork. He said I spent too much time there, that I cared more about vegetables than about him. And maybe he was right. The garden never demanded things from me I couldn't give, never made me feel inadequate for being exactly what I was. What would you plant if you could have a garden here? The question seemed to surprise her. Here? On your ranch? Why not? There's plenty of land. Martha's always complaining that we have to buy vegetables from town instead of growing our own. Caleb found himself warming to the idea. You could have whatever space you wanted, design it however you liked. Emma's eyes shone with something that looked like hope tempered by caution. You're serious? You'd let me plant a garden? It's your home too now, Emma, at least for as long as you want it to be. Why wouldn't you have a garden? He paused, then added with deliberate honesty. Besides, I'd like to see you happy. And you light up when you talk about growing things. She was quiet for the moment, and Caleb worried he'd overstepped, pushed too hard towards something she wasn't ready for. But then she smiled, and it was the most open, unguarded expression he'd seen from her. I'd plant tomatoes, 6 different varieties, and beans, both bush and pole, squash, definitely squash, herbs for Martha's cooking, maybe some flowers too, though that's probably impractical. She caught herself, laughing slightly. Listen to me, planning a whole farm when you just offered a small plot. Plan the whole farm if you want. I like hearing you talk about it. You sound alive, not performing or managing or surviving, just alive. The observation seemed to reach something deep in Emma. Her smile softened and she reached across the table, touching his hand briefly. Thank you for seeing that, for making space for it. I should thank you for reminding me there's more to life than building empires and protecting territory. He turned his hand over, catching her fingers briefly before releasing them. I'd forgotten what it felt like to care about something just because it brought joy, not because it served some larger purpose. They talked through the rest of the meal and into the evening, conversation flowing with the same natural ease as that first night. Emma told him about the books she'd read, the places she wanted to see, the small dreams she'd set aside during her marriage and was beginning to reclaim. Caleb found himself sharing things he hadn't spoken of in years: his father's death, the crushing weight of inherited debt, the loneliness of those early years building the ranch with only Wade's stubborn faith to sustain him. Did you ever regret it? Emma asked as they washed dishes together, another small intimacy that felt significant. Choosing the ranch over Catherine? Caleb considered the question carefully, wanting to give her honesty rather than the easy answer. For a long time, yes. I convinced myself that I'd sacrifice love for land, happiness for success, that I was noble or tragic or whatever story I needed to tell myself to make the pain bearable. He dried a plate slowly. But now? Now I think I chose authentically. I chose the thing that mattered most to me, and she chose the thing that mattered most to her. We just couldn't choose each other and those things at the same time. That's very mature of you. It took 8 years and a lot of whiskey to get there. He smiled slightly. What about you? Do you regret your marriage? I regret how long I stayed, how much of myself I gave away trying to save something that couldn't be saved. Emma rinsed the last dish, her movements thoughtful. But I don't regret marrying him. He taught me important things, even if the lessons were painful. He taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive losing everything and still find reasons to keep going, that love without respect is just another kind of prison. Those are hard lessons. The hardest ones usually are. She dried her hands, turning to face him in the warm kitchen light. But they made me someone who could ride up to your gate and ask for nothing except to be seen. Someone who could sit in your library and tell the truth about my failures. Someone who could hear you say no and not take it as a rejection of everything I am. Caleb felt the weight of her words, the courage they represented. I'm glad you came. That you were brave enough to ignore every reasonable objection and just come. Me too. Emma moved closer, close enough that Caleb could see the exact color of her eyes in the lamplight, brown with flecks of amber and green, like earth and growing things. Can I ask you something? Anything. What are we doing here, Caleb? Really? Because this feels like more than employer and employee, more than two lonely people keeping each other company. But I need to know what you want this to be, what you're hoping for. The question deserved truth, even though the truth scared him more than any business risk he'd ever taken. I don't know exactly. I know I want you here. I know I think about you more than I probably should. I know that for the first time in 8 years, I'm considering the possibility that maybe protecting myself from hurt isn't the same as actually living. He took a breath. But I'm not ready to call this romance or courtship or anything that comes with expectations I'm not sure I can meet. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, because I feel the same way. Emma's smile was understanding. I'm not ready for romance either, not ready to risk my heart on someone who might need me to be smaller than I am. But I'm willing to see what this becomes, to stay honest with each other and let whatever's growing here grow at its own pace. No promises we can't keep? No promises we can't keep, she confirmed. Just honesty, patience, and the willingness to try. Caleb felt something settle in his chest, some tension he'd been carrying since Emma first arrived finally easing. This wasn't a grand declaration or a commitment to forever. It was something simpler and perhaps more precious, two wounded people agreeing to be honest with each other, to try, to see what developed when fear wasn't the primary guide. I should let you get some rest, he said reluctantly. Morning comes early on a ranch. It does. But Emma didn't move immediately. Caleb, thank you. For tonight. For the garden. For being willing to try instead of hiding behind the walls that keep you safe. Thank you for making me want to try. After Emma went upstairs, Caleb stood in his kitchen, the room that had felt empty for so long despite Martha's daily presence, and recognized the feeling spreading through his chest. Not happiness, exactly. Not yet. But something close to it. Something that felt like possibility. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Emma worked alongside Martha during the days, managing accounts and household tasks with quiet competence. But the evenings became their own. Time carved out for conversations by the fire, shared meals, comfortable silences while they read. Caleb found himself looking forward to nightfall in ways he never had before, anticipating Emma's presence in his library, her perspective on the books they discussed, the way she challenged his assumptions without making him feel attacked. Wade noticed the change, commenting on it one afternoon while they inspected fence repairs. "Boss seems lighter these days, almost happy, if I didn't know better." "Don't read too much into it," Caleb warned. "Emma and I have an arrangement, nothing more." "Right, an arrangement that has you smiling at breakfast and actually talking at supper instead of eating in your office." Wade's expression was knowing. "I'm not blind, Caleb, and I'm not judging. I'm just saying it's good to see you acting like a human being again instead of a machine that happens to look like one." The comment lodged in Caleb's mind, making him wonder what Wade saw that he couldn't quite acknowledge himself. Was he happy? The concept felt foreign, almost dangerous. Happiness implied vulnerability, the possibility of loss, all the things he'd spent years protecting himself against. But when Emma appeared that evening with dirt under her fingernails from working in the plot Caleb had designated for her garden, her face flushed with the satisfaction of physical labor, he felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. She showed him where she'd marked out beds for different vegetables, her voice animated as she described her plans. "I know it's probably too ambitious for one person, but I figure I can always scale back if it becomes too much. Martha says she'll help with the preserving if I can grow enough." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. "And I thought maybe we could build a small greenhouse for starting seedlings. Nothing fancy, just something to extend the growing season." "We'll build whatever you need," Caleb heard himself say. "I'll have the men start on materials next week." Emma's smile could have powered the whole ranch. "Really? You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean." He studied her, this woman who'd appeared at his gate asking for nothing, and had somehow created space for joy he'd forgotten existed. "Besides, you were right. I've spent too long building things for practical purposes. It'll be good to build something just because it makes someone happy." She moved closer, standing beside him to look at her planned garden. "This place suits you, you know. Not just the ranch itself, but this version of it, where there's room for things that don't serve any purpose except being beautiful or nourishing or worth the effort just because they are." "You're talking about more than the garden." "Maybe I am." She glanced up at him. "Maybe I'm talking about building a life that includes space for things that scare you. Like trust, like connection, like the possibility that some people stay." Caleb felt his breath catch at the directness of it, at how clearly she saw the fears he'd barely acknowledged himself. "And if they don't stay? If I let myself believe in this and it falls apart like everything else? Then at least you'll know you tried, that you were brave enough to risk it." Emma's hand found his, her fingers threading through his with easy familiarity. "That's all any of us can do, Caleb. Try. Hope. Build something worth protecting, even knowing it might not last forever." Standing in the fading light with Emma's hand in his, looking at the patch of earth she'd already begun transforming, Caleb felt the last of his resistance crack. He was scared, terrified really, of what he was beginning to feel. But under the fear was something stronger, the recognition that Emma was right, that protecting himself from pain wasn't the same as actually living, that some risks were worth taking even knowing they might break you. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not just as my employee, not just as someone helping with the household. Stay as whatever we're becoming. Let's see what grows here, Emma, in your garden and between us." Emma turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, we can't uncross it. Once we stop pretending this is just practical and admit it's personal, everything changes." "I'm sure." Terrified, but sure. He squeezed her hand gently. "You were brave enough to ride up to my gate in the middle of winter. The least I can do is be brave enough to let you stay." Her smile was answer enough, but Emma stood on her toes and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to his cheek. Then I'll stay, for as long as this works, for as long as we're both brave enough to keep trying. The kiss lingered between them like the last warmth of daylight, gentle and significant and terrifying in its simplicity. Emma stepped back, her cheeks flushed, and Caleb found himself wanting to pull her closer, to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep, to declare things he'd sworn never to feel again. But he held himself still, letting the moment settle naturally, honoring the careful pace they'd both agreed on. Spring arrived gradually in Montana territory, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch to reveal the brown earth beneath. Emma worked her garden plot with the focused determination of someone building a cathedral, turning soil that had never been cultivated, removing rocks, adding composted manure from the barn. Caleb found himself inventing reasons to check on her progress, watching from a distance as she moved through the rows with grace born of purpose. "You're staring again," Wade observed one afternoon, catching Caleb's attention fixed on the garden where Emma knelt among the prepared beds. "I'm supervising." "Right, supervising a woman who clearly knows what she's doing." Wade's tone was amused rather than mocking. "You know, boss, it's okay to just admit you care about her. Won't make you less of a man to say it out loud." Caleb tore his gaze away from Emma's figure. "It's complicated." "Love usually is, but that doesn't make it wrong." Wade shifted his weight, his weathered face thoughtful. "You've spent 8 years convincing yourself that being alone is the same as being strong. Maybe it's time to consider that letting someone in might take more strength than keeping them out." The word love hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Caleb wanted to deny it, to insist that what he felt for Emma was something simpler, safer. Companionship, respect, mutual understanding between two wounded people. But denying it didn't make it less true. Somewhere between that first honest conversation in the barn and now, something had shifted. Emma had stopped being a visitor in his space and become integral to it. Her absence would leave a hole that no amount of discipline or work could fill. That realization terrified him more than any business failure ever had. The greenhouse went up over 3 weeks, a simple structure of glass and wood that caught the spring sun and held it like a promise. Emma supervised its construction with the same careful attention she brought to everything, making adjustments, ensuring proper ventilation, her excitement barely contained beneath her usual quiet demeanor. When it was finished, she spent an entire day arranging seedling trays, mixing soil, planting tiny seeds that would eventually become the vegetables and herbs she'd planned. Caleb found her there as the sun set, surrounded by the earthy smell of growing things, her hands dirt-stained, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen it. "Thank you," she said without looking up from her work. "For this, for making space for something that matters to me." "You don't have to keep thanking me, Emma. This is your home too." She did look up then, her eyes finding his with that directness he'd come to treasure. "Is it? My home? Or am I still just the employee you're being kind to?" The question cut through the careful ambiguity they'd maintained for weeks. Caleb could deflect, retreat to safer ground, maintain the pretense that what they were building was still undefined. But Emma deserved better than his cowardice. "You're not just an employee. You haven't been since that first night when you looked at me and saw past all the walls I'd built." He moved into the greenhouse, closing the distance between them. "But I don't know what word to use for what you are. What we are. Every term feels inadequate or presumptuous or weighted with expectations I'm scared of failing to meet." Emma set down her trowel, wiping her hands on her apron. "What if we don't use words? What if we just are? Whatever this is, whatever it's becoming, do we need to name it to make it real? Don't we? Don't people need definitions, clarity, something to hold on to?" "Maybe some people do, but we're not some people, Caleb. We're two people who've both been hurt by promises that couldn't be kept, by expectations that crushed instead of lifted. Maybe we don't need promises or labels. Maybe we just need honesty and patience and the willingness to keep choosing each other day after day for as long as it works." Caleb felt something ease in his chest, some pressure he'd been carrying without realizing it. Emma was right. They didn't need grand declarations or formal commitments. They just needed what they'd already been building: honesty, respect, the growing trust that came from being seen and choosing to stay anyway. I'm choosing you, he said quietly. I have been for weeks. I'm terrified of what that means, of how much it could hurt if you change your mind. I'm terrified too. Emma stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Every day I wake up half convinced this is a dream, that I'll somehow ruin it by being too broken, or too quiet, or too much myself. But Caleb, I'd rather risk being hurt again than spend the rest of my life protecting myself from the possibility of happiness. The courage in her words, in her willingness to be vulnerable, despite everything she'd survived, made Caleb's own fears seem small by comparison. If Emma could risk this after what her husband had put her through, surely he could find the strength to do the same. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her dirt-stained hands in his. Then we risk it together. No promises about forever, because neither of us can guarantee that. But a promise to be honest, to choose each other when we can, to not run when things get difficult. I can promise that. Emma's smile was tremulous but real. I can promise to keep trying, keep being honest, keep showing up even when I'm scared. Then that's enough. For now, it's enough. He kissed her then, properly this time, and it was nothing like the careful peck she'd given him weeks ago. It was honest and wanting and tinged with the fear they'd both acknowledged, but underneath all that was something solid, something that felt like the beginning of trust rebuilding itself from ruins. When they finally separated, Emma rested her forehead against his chest, her voice muffled by his shirt. This is going to be complicated, isn't it? People will talk. They'll make assumptions about what we are to each other. Let them talk. This ranch has weathered worse than gossip. Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Besides, Wade's been making assumptions for weeks. Martha, too. I think the only people who didn't know what this was becoming were us. Emma's laugh was soft against his chest. We're not very good at this, are we? At letting ourselves be happy. We'll learn. Together. They stood like that as the light faded from the greenhouse, surrounded by the promise of future growth, holding on to each other with the careful grip of people who understood exactly how precious and fragile trust could be. The next month brought the full emergence of spring, and with it, a transformation of the ranch that went beyond the seasonal greening of the land. Emma's garden flourished under her careful attention, neat rows of seedlings pushing through the soil with determined vigor. She worked the plot for hours each day, her movements becoming more confident as her body adjusted to the physical labor, her face losing some of the gaunt shadows that had marked her when she'd first arrived. Caleb found himself structuring his days around moments with her, breakfast conversations about her planting schedule, afternoon visits to see her progress, evenings in the library where they read or talked or simply existed in comfortable silence. The careful boundaries they'd maintained in those early weeks dissolved naturally, replaced by an ease that felt both foreign and absolutely right. Martha watched this evolution with satisfaction barely concealed, her comments growing increasingly pointed. "When are you going to make an honest woman of her?" she asked one morning after Emma had gone to the garden. "We're not rushing into anything, Martha. We're taking our time, figuring out what this is without the pressure of expectations." Caleb kept his voice firm. "I won't make promises I'm not certain I can keep." Promises aren't about certainty, Caleb. They're about commitment, about choosing to try even when you can't guarantee the outcome. Martha poured coffee with more force than necessary. "That girl loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. And you love her, even if you're too stubborn to say it. How long are you going to make her wait for you to admit it?" The accusation stung because it carried truth. Emma had never said she loved him, maintaining the same careful honesty they'd agreed on, but Caleb saw it in the way she smiled when he appeared, heard it in the gentle concern when he worked too late, felt it in the trust she offered daily despite her own scars and fears. And he loved her. The realization had crept up on him gradually, built from 1,000 small moments, the way she hummed while working, her careful script in the ledgers, the fierce joy on her face when her first seedlings emerged, the honesty she brought to every conversation. He loved her in ways that terrified him, in ways that made all his carefully constructed defenses feel pointless. But saying it felt like stepping off a cliff, like giving her the power to destroy him the way Catherine had, only worse because Emma mattered more. Emma saw him, knew him, had somehow slipped past every wall he'd built and made a home in the spaces he'd thought were permanently closed. I'm not making her wait, he said finally. We're building something at our own pace. That's what we both need. Just don't wait so long that you lose what you're too scared to claim, Martha warned. Life's short, Caleb. Shorter than we like to think. And happiness is rare enough that wasting it on fear seems downright foolish. Her words haunted him through the day, through the evening meal where Emma told him about a hawk she'd seen circling her garden, through the quiet hour in the library where they sat reading on opposite ends of the sofa, their feet touching in the middle with casual intimacy. You're quiet tonight, Emma observed, setting down her book. More than usual. Just thinking. About? She shifted, tucking her feet under her and turning to face him fully. Talk to me, Caleb. Whatever it is, we promise to be honest. He set his own book aside, gathering his thoughts. Martha asked when I was going to marry you, when I was going to make things official, proper, whatever that means. Emma's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Caution, maybe, or hope carefully tempered by experience. And what did you tell her? That we're taking our time, that we don't need other people's timelines or expectations. He paused. But it made me wonder what you want, Emma, what you're hoping this becomes. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers pleating the fabric of her skirt. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. I want what we have. This honesty, this partnership, this space where I can be completely myself without fear of judgment or demands to be different. Whether that eventually includes marriage or remains exactly as it is, I'm happy. You don't want to marry. I didn't say that. I said I'm happy either way. Emma met his eyes directly. Caleb, I was married before. I know what it looks like when legal promises don't match the reality of the relationship. I'd rather have what we have now. Honest, equal, freely chosen every day, than a marriage certificate that binds us together without actual commitment underneath it. The answer was so perfectly Emma, so completely honest and practical, that Caleb felt his fear ease slightly. She wasn't waiting for him to propose, wasn't counting days or building expectations. She was simply here, in this moment, choosing him with the same deliberate intention she brought to everything. What if I want to marry you? The question surprised them both. Not now, necessarily. Not tomorrow. But eventually. What if I want to stand up in front of people and claim you publicly, make promises that terrify me but that I want to make anyway? Emma's breath caught, her eyes widening. Do you? Want that? I think I do. I think I'm moving toward wanting it, even though every instinct I have screams that it's dangerous and foolish and will end in pain. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. But Emma, if we do this, if we make those promises, I need you to understand something. I will fail sometimes. I'll retreat into work when things get difficult. I'll be stubborn and closed off, and probably hurt you without meaning to. I'm not the easy choice. I'm not the romantic hero who'll sweep you off your feet with grand gestures. Good, because I don't want the romantic hero. I want you, the real you, with all the complications and scars and fears that make you who you are. Emma squeezed his hand. And Caleb, I'll fail too. I'll be too quiet when I should speak up. I'll retreat to my garden when I'm overwhelmed. I'll probably trigger all your abandonment fears by needing space sometimes. I'm not the easy choice either. So we're both difficult, damaged, scared people trying to build something that might not work. Exactly. Which means we already know the worst about each other, and we're choosing it anyway. Her smile was tremulous but genuine. That's either the stupidest thing we've ever done, or the bravest. Maybe both. Caleb pulled her closer, needing the physical reassurance of her presence. I love you, Emma. I'm terrified to say it, terrified of what it means, but it's true. I love you. The words hung in the air for a moment, then Emma's face crumpled with emotion, joy and relief and fear all tangled together. I love you too. I have for weeks, maybe longer. I just didn't know how to say it without making it feel like pressure or expectation. They held each other in the quiet library, the fire burning down to embers, and Caleb felt something fundamental shift. Not the dramatic transformation he'd once thought love required, but something subtler and stronger. The simple recognition that he wasn't alone anymore, that someone saw him completely and chose him anyway. that love didn't have to be perfect or easy to be real. The summer arrived with Montana's characteristic intensity, hot days and cool nights, thunderstorms that rolled across the plains with dramatic fury. Emma's garden exploded into abundance, providing more vegetables than the household could use. She began preserving the excess, the kitchen filled with the sweet, sharp smell of pickling brine and the earthy scent of tomatoes being put up for winter. Martha taught her techniques passed down through generations, and Caleb came home each evening to find the two women working side by side, their easy partnership another piece of the home Emma had helped create. Wade cornered him one evening after supper, his expression more serious than usual. "Boss, I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without getting defensive." Caleb tensed, recognizing his foreman's serious conversation tone. "Go ahead." "You're happier than I've ever seen you. Emma's good for you, good for this place. The men have noticed it too. You're easier to work with, more flexible, more human." Wade paused. "But if you're going to marry her, you need to actually ask her, not hint at it, not talk about eventually. Ask her properly, give her the choice, and then trust that she'll say yes. What if she says no? Then you'll know. And you can both make decisions based on reality instead of assumption. But Caleb, that woman loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. She's just waiting for you to be brave enough to make it real." The conversation lodged in Caleb's mind, making him hyper-aware of Emma's presence, of the life they'd built together over these months. She'd become essential to his days in ways he couldn't quite articulate. The house felt right when she was in it, wrong when she wasn't. Her opinions on ranch business had become valuable, her perspective often catching things he missed. She'd integrated herself into every aspect of his life with such natural grace that he couldn't remember what things had been like before her. And yet, asking her to marry him felt like the biggest risk he'd ever taken. Bigger than building the ranch, bigger than any business decision. Because Emma mattered more than any of it. He found her in the garden on a late August evening, the sun setting in spectacular fashion across the western sky. She was harvesting tomatoes, her hands stained red from the fruit, her face peaceful with the satisfaction of work well done. "Good crop this year," he observed, moving to stand beside her. "Better than I expected. The greenhouse made all the difference in getting them started early." She held up a particularly large specimen. "This one's almost too perfect to eat. I might just sit and admire it for a while." "Emma, can we talk?" Something in his tone made her set down the tomato, her full attention turning to him with the focused intensity he'd come to associate with important conversations. "Of course. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's actually right, which is what's terrifying me." He took a breath, gathering courage. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about not needing labels or promises to make this real. And you were right. What we have doesn't need external validation to matter. But Emma, I want to give you that validation anyway. I want to stand up in front of everyone and claim you. I want legal promises and public commitment and all the things we said we didn't need." Emma's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Caleb, let me finish, please, before I lose my nerve." He took her hands, dirt and tomato stains and all. "I'm not good at romance. I don't have flowery speeches prepared. All I have is the truth. You came into my life when I'd convinced myself I was fine alone, and you showed me the difference between surviving and living. You saw past every wall I'd built, and instead of demanding I tear them down, you just sat with me until I was ready to let you in. You made me braver, Emma, braver and better and more myself than I've ever been." Tears streamed down Emma's face, but she was smiling, her grip on his hands almost painful in its intensity. "So I'm asking, properly and publicly, and with full awareness of how terrified I am, Emma Reed, will you marry me? Will you let me love you for as long as we both draw breath? Will you build this life with me, knowing it won't be perfect, but trusting we'll figure it out together?" "Yes." The word came out choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you, Caleb. I want all of it. The promises, the partnership, the life we've already started building. Yes." He kissed her there among the tomato plants, surrounded by the evidence of her hard work and vision, and felt something settle in his soul. This was right. She was right. They were right, in all their complicated, scarred, imperfect glory. When they finally separated, Emma was laughing through her tears. "You proposed to me in a garden while I'm covered in dirt and tomato juice. That's the least romantic proposal in history. It's honest. That's more important than romantic. It is. She kissed him again, quick and joyful. It absolutely is. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Caleb realized that at some point during these months, his carefully constructed fortress had transformed into a home. Not because Emma had torn down his walls, but because she'd helped him understand that walls could have doors, that protection didn't require isolation, that strength sometimes looked like vulnerability. Martha's face when they told her the news was worth documenting. She actually cried, pulling Emma into a fierce embrace before turning to Caleb with an expression that mixed joy and vindication. About damn time. I was beginning to think you'd wait until you were both too old to enjoy it. Wade's reaction was more subdued, but no less genuine. A firm handshake for Caleb and a gentle hug for Emma. Welcome to the family officially, not that you weren't already part of it. The wedding took place in late September, when Emma's garden had produced its final harvest and the aspen trees turned the mountainsides to gold. It was a small ceremony, just the ranch hands and a few people from town, held in front of the house Caleb had built to impress visitors, and Emma had transformed into a home. The local minister officiated, his words simple and honest, nothing flowery or false. Emma wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue cotton that brought out the warmth in her eyes, her hair braided simply with wild flowers from her garden woven through it. She looked nothing like the society brides who'd arrived in expensive carriages, and Caleb loved her all the more for it. When the minister asked for their vows, Caleb spoke from the heart rather than tradition. Emma, I promise to see you, to honor who you are without demanding you be anything else. I promise to be honest, even when it's hard, to choose you every day for as long as you'll have me. I promise to protect what we're building without trying to control it. And I promise to love you with all my broken, complicated, fiercely guarded heart. Emma's vows were equally honest, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Caleb, I promise to stay. To not run when things get difficult or when I'm scared. I promise to speak my truth and hear yours. To build a life that has room for both of us to be fully ourselves. I promise to tend what we're growing together with the same care I give my garden, patience, attention, and faith that good things take time. And I promise to love you exactly as you are for as long as we both draw breath. The kiss that sealed their promises was witnessed by the people who'd watched their relationship develop, who'd seen them move from wary strangers to partners to something that looked remarkably like happiness. When they finally separated, the cheers and applause echoed across the ranch, and Caleb felt a completeness he'd never thought possible. That night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had departed, Caleb and Emma stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the land that had once been just his and was now theirs. The stars were brilliant in the clear autumn sky, and the air carried the first hints of winter's approach. No regrets? Emma asked, leaning against his side. Not a single one. You? Just one. That I didn't ride up to your gate sooner, that I wasted time being scared when I could have been here with you. Caleb wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. We both needed the time we needed. We weren't ready before, but we're ready now. We are. Emma tilted her face up to his. Thank you for being brave enough to let me in, for choosing trust over fear. Thank you for being patient while I figured it out, for seeing past all my walls and deciding I was worth the effort. They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned that love didn't have to be perfect to be real, that trust could be rebuilt from ruins, that sometimes the best things came from the courage to try despite fear. The man who'd refused everyone had finally found someone worth letting in. And the woman who'd learned to be small had found a place where she could be exactly as large as she was. Inside the house, the fire burned low in the hearth, warming rooms that were no longer empty. Emma's books sat on Caleb's shelves. Her garden tools rested beside his ranch equipment. Their lives had intertwined so completely that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. And in that intertwining, both of them had found what they'd been searching for without knowing it. Not someone to complete them or fix them or save them from loneliness, but someone to walk beside them, someone to see them truly and choose them anyway, someone to build with, fail with, try with, love with. The cold rancher who'd spent 8 years refusing brides, had finally found what his fortress had been missing all along. Not a wife to display or a companion to fill silence, but a partner who understood that strength sometimes looked like surrender, that vulnerability required more courage than walls, and that the greatest risk was often the one most worth taking. As autumn gave way to winter and the Montana landscape turned once more to white, the Hawthorne Ranch settled into new rhythms. Emma's greenhouse sheltered seedlings for next year's garden. Caleb's ledgers showed Emma's careful script alongside his own. And in the evenings, the library held two people instead of one, reading together, talking together, simply existing together in the profound comfort of being known. The house that had been too large for one person was exactly right for two. The land that had demanded everything from Caleb now had Emma's gentler touch alongside his determination. And the hearts that had both been convinced they were too broken to risk again proved what they'd both learned through hard experience and harder courage. That broken things could heal, that bent things could find new shapes. That love, when built on honesty and patience and the daily choice to try, could transform even the coldest heart into something warm and welcoming and worth protecting. Not because love made everything easy, but because it made the difficulty worthwhile. Because it turned survival into living, existence into purpose, and loneliness into the profound gift of being seen by someone who chose to stay.